getting started. This Hangout on Air is live. Sigmund Bloom here, Season Lammy on assignment. Matt Waldman, always full of delights. And the doc is in, Dr. Gene Bramall. And because we are drinking from the fire hose, because it is the preseason and the news comes, and as soon as we've adjusted to the latest piece of news, something else comes, and we got the doc back. He's giving us his time and expertise. Let's jump right in, Doc. All right. And good vacation?
Yeah, very good. A little time in southern Utah doing some canyon stuff and other things. Good times.
That's amazing time. Did you go to Bryce Canyon?
Yeah, Bryce, I was a little bit nervous about Bryce because I'm not big into crowds and big touristy stuff, but we got up a little bit early and got out there before a lot of the folks did. And I was actually more impressed with Bryce than I was Zion and Arches and a lot of the other places we went there.
Did you see Ebenezer Bryce, the guy that gets named after? Did you see what he said about it? Like what his quote was?
No, what was it? I may have read it, not realized.
Hell of a place to lose a cow.
Yeah. Yes, I did see that.
Anyway,
I didn't lose any cows or children, thankfully.
We're going to get lost in injury stuff right now. Let's start with Alshon Jeffery, because we do have, even though Doug Peterson's been saying, I don't know what we're talking about, we do have something that he is in, as of August 11th, in the strength portion of his rehab. I was talking to James Seltzer, does great work, Eagle stuff, and he said that he thinks Wentz will be ready before Jeffery. But PUP might be a bit of a stretch because conceding those 6 games right up front, it's probably not something they need to do based on the likely range of timelines. How much can you pinpoint this? What is the range of possibilities for Jeffery?
Well, I think that makes sense. Jeffery's on the PUP list and Wentz is not. Wentz has been doing some 11-on-11 work, and Jeffery's still just in the strength phase of his rehab. So although I think it's too soon to say Wentz will be back for sure for week 1, we can talk about that in a little bit. Jeffery has always been kind of up in the air. And Doug Peterson, the face of the franchise in front of the media, has been telling folks for months that he doesn't want his injured players who are recovering from injury and surgery on the field until they're 100%. And that's not a reasonable goal. Nobody's going to be 100% even by the end of the preseason. But what he's saying is he wants his players to be able to be near at their best and not at risk of aggravations and things like that. And as we talked about with Andrew Luck last year, and this is not an analogous situation, but it is in the sense that strength-based rehab is what it is. You have got to clear that last little bit of hurdle to be ready to do whatever's asked of you on the football field. And that includes, in Jeffery's case, getting his arms away from his body, using his upper body to gain separation when he needs to, and to be able to practice fully during the week and play without limitations on, Thursday, Sunday, Monday nights. And we'll see how that goes. So putting a timetable on it, I don't know. The end of the rehab there's a long nebulous 6 to 9 month recovery timetable for a reason. He could be right at 5 to 6 months and be close to ready for the regular season, or it might last a little bit longer. And the reason they have him on the PUP list is there's a chance that it would be 4 to 6 weeks into the regular season before he's ready. And I don't think they're ready to make that determination yet. There hasn't been any indication of a setback in his rehab, but we're getting closer and closer to the point where he needs to get on the field and do something, probably somewhere between the 3rd and 4th preseason week, because the Eagles have the Thursday night game. So this, they don't have that extra 3 or 4 days to prepare. They're going to start preparing for that opening week game in advance of the final preseason week. So he needs to be out on the field doing something soon. I'm not saying that it's likely he's going to stay on the PUP list, but I think it's looking questionable that he's going to be ready for week 1 and week 2.
Gene, this whole Sony Michel stuff is just confusing to me. So you talked about him having a potential bone-on-bone condition, and then pre-draft, but the Patriots, of course, drafted him in the 1st round, didn't seem to bother them, and now we're talking about him being gone at least maybe for another few days, if not maybe another week. What's going on with that knee? What's the best that you can kind of give us about what's going on here with him, and short-term and long-term?
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of helpful specifics reported when he had the procedure, the initial, and maybe it was just a little bit of misunderstanding as things were being translated from whoever the sources were that were giving Ian Rappaport and Mike Reese and other of the good folks around the Patriots information. We hear initially that maybe it was a 4 to 6 week situation. You wonder if they had, had to go in and remove a piece of cartilage or do something else. And then very quickly afterwards, it was kind of walked back to where he just had some fluid drained, and then they wanted to give him some time off. So I think the best that we know is that there's an inflamed joint there, and it's the same knee that there were multiple reports that he was falling in pre-draft, on draft boards and things like that, because there was a degenerative condition in the knee already. And we've heard that with Jay Ajayi, and we've seen that with multiple other players in the past. It's not an uncommon situation. And it means that probably the length of the career is going to be shortened, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the first 2, 3, 4 years of the career are going to be a problem. But if we're already in early August having a knee drained and managing a joint that's a little bit of a problem, even if it wasn't a little bit more of a surgical situation, where he had arthroscopic surgery for something with cartilage, you wonder how long this is going to linger and whether or not it's going to be a situation that has to be managed throughout the year. So I think the follow-up reports that were done that everybody seemed adamant that it was not going to cost him much for the regular season, I think sounds optimistic to me. Hopefully he doesn't miss many games or lose time in what's likely to be another pretty wide committee situation. But I think this is, for the longer term, there's a little bit more of a concern than the shorter term. You would hope he'd be ready for week 1, and he's yet another one of these players. We're kind of in preseason limbo right now where, these guys don't necessarily have to be on the field this week, but the closer we get to game preparation weeks, they need to be back out there. They need to be reconditioning. They need to be proving to their teams, especially the rookies, that they can be trusted to hold up through a week of practice so that they can participate in the game plan to start. And that's not just week 1, that's in the future as well. But we don't have that much information like we do week to week during the regular season. So some of these players, a number of players came back today that we were a little bit worried about, and some of them are not. We're kind of getting up against it as we finish up preseason week 3. Once we get through that third preseason game, they don't have to participate in that game, but they have to be showing that they're going to be able to take part in game planning activities after that. So we're kind of looking at the next 7 to 10 days with Michel, and if they let him get back on the practice field and do a little bit more, then I think we can be pretty confident that he's going to be available early in the season.
Before I pivot to with the other mysterious knee situation on Michel, what kind of shadow does a knee drain that early in camp cast over his workload or just the season? I don't know if you said this, but it's something I feel like I've learned from Eugene, that players are as healthy as they're going to be in the preseason.
Some of them are. I mean, you're alluding to Doug Baldwin there as well. You come into camp kind of unexpectedly, maybe not as healthy as they thought they were. But yeah, the longer we go, the more of these players that get 60 to 70, game snaps, they're going to take hits and get little dings and everything else. So, this goes, I wouldn't say one of two ways, but the most optimistic read on Michel is he had a little, he banged his knee, something happened. The bone-on-bone condition is there. He had some swelling in the knee that was causing some problems. They were very proactive about it, drained the fluid, allow his knee joint to settle down a little bit with some anti-inflammatories. Usually don't do necessarily, probably try to avoid injections and things like that, but to allow him to rest a little bit and then be back. And then the inflammation is gone and he's ready to go in week 1. It doesn't recur. Or he does have a bone-on-bone degenerative condition. It was already inflamed and aggravated. The draining procedure didn't do what they hoped it to do. And it does have to be managed with practice participation and game reps and all of those sorts of things through the next 4 months of the season. And that's just going to be a week-to-week situation for us. The truth in the middle could be, he starts the season fine, has a hit during a game or something happens in practice where we go through this all over again. And it's really difficult to predict.
So Baldwin, he running sprints, Gene.
Sure. Yeah, there's less information about Baldwin than there is about Michel, just because there really wasn't any past history of something going on with Baldwin's knee, at least that we were aware of, and there wasn't anything specific about this procedure. My speculation was that when Pete Carroll said he was going to have something, I think what they say, some special treatments, I think, on his knee. A lot of the Seahawks last year and the year before, Cam Chancellor and others had that Regenikine injection where they were trying to do some anti-inflammatory work for them as well. And then they, they let the knee cool down for 2 or 3 weeks. And all of those players that went through that last year were available for week 1 and were relatively healthy. And it's nice to see that they've cleared Baldwin to be doing some pretty strenuous conditioning if they're allowing him to do sprints out there. And that would jive with what Carroll tried to tell us about a week ago, where for sure he's going to be ready for week 1. But again, you got to get through this reconditioning phase. Hopefully it was a minor something that just needed to be handled, and they had the time to do so with the 6 to 7 weeks in the preseason. And just like Michel, we're watching for kind of the same things. How much more is he allowed to do? When are they going to clear him to return to full practice? And then is he going to be able to practice on Wednesday and Thursday in advance of week 1 games?
So Antonio Brown has a quad strain, and you have him listed week to week. So how do you know what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think his chiropractor / somebody on his training team kind of called it a hip flexor situation, as did Mark Kabbali in The Athletic, but we've heard quad from Schefter and a few others, so kind of somewhere in that upper thigh leg area. I don't think it matters specifically what it is, other than, there's a little bit of controversy this week about whether or not he was limping or whether or not they had just planned to give him a maintenance day. But there was some video clips earlier in the week that showed him moving pretty well, and trashing some of his cornerbacks with how quickly he was moving. Like every soft tissue injury in a veteran this time of year, there's really no sense in rushing through things. Give him as much time to recover without risking an aggravation as possible. So it's likely that there's nothing to see here, but you'd like to see him back on the practice field sometime this weekend. It's not likely to play this week, I don't believe, but get him back out there, let him do a little bit, continue to condition, and be okay. The longer this lingers, the more you do wonder maybe he did have a setback and was just pushing back against Bouchette, the reporter that said he may have been limping a little bit this week. So again, I have veterans this time of year with soft tissue things as week to week. It could easily be day to day. I think I marked him as probable for week 1 is kind of my speculation there. I think that's probably the way it's going to play out. I'm not too concerned about him right now.
Ed Bouchette is unimpeachable. Unimpeachable. I've been reading him since I could read. Gene, when we talk about these veterans with these soft tissue injuries, how much does it change when it's a situation like Rashard Matthews, who we know had something bothering him for 2 months before camp, and is still just hanging out on the sidelines?
Yeah, I mean, we're assuming it's a soft tissue injury. He's not seen to have been in a cast or a boot or some sort of immobilization device, so I think it's reasonable to assume that's the case. And if it is, it's not good. It's definitely a higher grade situation or something that they thought wasn't a big deal because they didn't, have too much.
They put him on the PUP, but they didn't announce it when camp opened.
Exactly. So, it's odd. And nobody really knows what's, that's undisclosed, or ex-Burkhead is undisclosed. There's a couple of players we just don't really have any idea what's going on at all. And there hasn't been any information that comes out of Tennessee to help us along at all. If it is a soft tissue injury and there's not an aggravation, it's a relatively high-grade situation. But I think he's been seen in pads, doing some stuff off to the side, if I remember correctly. So I think there's reason to hope that they're preparing him to return soon. But, he's one of those players where if you don't see it soon, you have to start to wonder, maybe not necessarily is he going to stay on the PUP list to start the season, but just how soon can he get back to practice and play?
Gene, so I'm still concerned about Carson Wentz. I mean, I certainly understand that he is probably going to push and be ready sometime within the first month, and I'm sure way earlier than that. But you look at how you discuss the nature of that injury and how he had to be immobilized, and how it, when you talk about the ligament that had to be immobilized, I wonder about the stability, lateral stability in that. And when I see him, our friend of the show, Eric Stoner, showed me a bunch of 3rd and 7+ tapes of Wentz last year. And as he watched this progression and the Eagles' progression in that offense, you saw lots of 3-step, 5-step drops and missed passes and misreads and not picking the correct side of the defense to actually start your progressions with. And after about 3 games in, they said, "Oh, let's put him in the pistol." And he hopped into place and threw the ball really nicely. And when they pressured him, he did young Ben Roethlisberger stuff and was able to throw the ball over the receivers' heads and, do things that my buddy Steve Vogt doesn't like me to talk about because Ben Roethlisberger is a much smarter quarterback now. But all that stuff was looking really great for him. But my concern isn't so much the stop, hop, and throw kind of stuff that he's going to get do in the pistol, but it's when teams can pressure him. Is he going to be able to be the Carson Wentz of old?
Not right away.
Early in the season, and how long will it take?
That's a difficult question to answer. There's lots of video on Carson Wentz from May, June, and July as they allowed him to do a little bit more. And there are times where he looks very comfortable and moving very well. And that still seems to be the consensus from players, beat writers, and coaches that he's moving pretty well. But you can also find video that suggests, maybe there's a little bit of hitch from time to time. Maybe he doesn't fully trust it. He is kind of, at least prior to tonight sort of set it up as saying, and Doug Peterson as well last week, it's going to be up to the medical staff. They have to clear me for what I'm allowed to do. They want to make absolutely sure that he's recovered enough to do a lot of those things that he's going to want to do. And it's, 9 months is pushing it a little bit, and that's kind of where he's going to be leading into the regular season. And they may need to make some adjustments in how they game plan. As you said, I don't think they're going to want him to be put in a situation where he may run the ball 5 to 7 times for 20 to 40 yards. All of this may become moot tonight because Nick Foles had his arm pulled from behind by a Patriots rusher and immediately grabbed for the inside of his arm and up underneath the shoulder. And it did not look like his shoulder was dislocated out of the socket, but he was not comfortable at all. It's a throwing shoulder injury, kind of suspicious for, and they're calling it a strain. And if that's the case, that usually means muscle more than tendon, or at least someplace in the joint. So, were there indications that his rotator cuff was injured? Could it have been a situation where his shoulder moved and it's more of a subluxation where it's not all the way out, but there was still a brief period where that shoulder joint isn't itself anymore? And that is a difficult thing for a throwing shoulder to get through quickly. And we are now 2.5 weeks away from week 1 for Foles. So if this is anything like that and it's significant, I would imagine you're going to hear about an MRI that Foles gets tomorrow, and we'll kind of go from there. There may not be a lot of, the reason it was going to be easy for them to keep Wentz off the PUP list and give him some time is they had a Super Bowl MVP backup there, and that's why they kept Foles rather than trading him. But if he's not available, and Carson Wentz is 90%, and they can game plan around him, I don't see them starting Nate Sudfeld instead of Wentz. So I think right now the health of Nick Foles' shoulder has as much to do with whether Carson Wentz is going to be starting in week 1 as whether or not the doctors clear him. Because they did allow him to do some 11-on-11 stuff and expose him to contact in minicamp in June. I think they're just being careful with him now to be sure. But they already allowed him to do that, and there wasn't any indication of a setback. So if Foles isn't ready to go at all or close at all, it's going to be Wentz in week 1, and it may have been anyway. So, we're going to know how much they allow him to do. I think they're probably going to let him do a little bit more against contact this week to see if he was ready to go. But I think it's going to be a period of time for Foles, and I think 3 weeks is going to be questionable for him. So it's looking more and more like we're going to move Wentz into the more probable category just because there may not be a better option on the roster now.
Yeah.
Clearly, you've forgotten that they signed Christian Hackenberg.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Gene, we had a bit of a hold our breath moment with Jerick McKinnon when he had to have an MRI. It comes back a calf strain, I believe that was the report. I know sometimes these things change. Comment on that, and in the context of McKinnon in line for the biggest workload of his career, and certainly that being part of the fantasy outlook that we had as a variable, and how that might factor into weighing that.
Yeah, I don't think we know. We can put, Antonio Brown was in that category. I think we could include Saquon Barkley in this calculus, as well as Jerick McKinnon and Marlon Mack and all of these other players. We just don't have a sense of what the grade on these injuries are. And we know because these players are going to be critical parts of the offense and expected to be, that there's no reason to rush them quickly. So it becomes very difficult to tell whether or not the second week of them missing practice is because it's a higher grade injury or because it's out of an abundance of caution and we're making sure that they're at the less risk of aggravation as possible. Yeah, I think you know how I feel about using the term injury prone. The players that seem to be the least likely to be injured are the ones that have already shown that they can handle big workloads. But until you put somebody in that situation, it's hard to know, was it just bad luck that they suffered a soft tissue injury, or is there something more where they're going to be, where their body isn't built for 40 to 50 snaps and 20 to 25 touches week in and week out. And it's something hard to gauge. I mean, Arian Foster was putting up tons of touches over time. And I don't think anybody would consider him particularly durable. Adrian Peterson has had multiple injuries over time, and I think people would generally consider him relatively durable due to the number of years and how well he's played. So I think it's really hard to judge whether or not this means that, an early injury like this, early in what we're expecting from Jerick McKinnon, means that he's not going to be able to hold up when he comes back or not. Yet, again, he's another player that the sooner he gets back, the better you're going to feel about him.
Well, we have a pair of rookies who were certainly performing very well before they went down with ACL tears. Is there any more news on the nature of their tears or the severity for either Geis or Deion Kane?
No, I haven't heard anything to suggest that they were more than isolated tears, and oftentimes we don't know whether or not there was a little bit of stretch in the MCL or some meniscus injuries or some other cartilage stuff going on. Sometimes we hear about that, sometimes we don't, and I don't even believe I've heard whether or not they've had surgery or yet or not. Sometimes they allow the swelling to go down and otherwise, but if there's anything nice about these ACL injuries, it's that they're happening in early August, and you're going to have a full calendar year to recover. And you would hope that, like many of the other players that had early ACLs over the past few years, that we see them pretty early in OTAs and minicamp, so we feel a good bit better about them as we're getting into the season, kind of like Deshaun Watson and others. So nothing new on those guys. I think there's every reason to expect that they'll be ready for opening week of 2019 and hopefully training camp and even earlier than that.
Gene, did Ben Roethlisberger suffer a concussion this week?
It doesn't
And did
sound
you
like
give
it.
it to him?
No, I didn't give it to him. I bear no ill health will to Ben Roethlisberger, regardless of how I feel about him and his diva-like ways. I'm just happy we didn't hear that he was going to retire again this week.
No, when will they play Jacksonville?
It doesn't matter. Mason Rudolph is there now, so Roethlisberger's going to play another 10 years. It's no worries. So Pittsburgh's medical staff is at the forefront of good concussion research and otherwise. That area of the country has been pretty important there. They've always been pretty careful with their players who have suffered head injury, so I have no reason to believe that there are any shenanigans in clearing Roethlisberger through the... And again, this is probably it's a good time to kind of talk about what protocol means. It bothers me when media members say that they've entered the concussion protocol, because you can think about that in many ways. Part of the protocol means appropriately evaluating to the best of our abilities. Well, not our, because I'm not there, but diagnosing and evaluating concussion as accurately as possible. That's the first part of the protocol, is trying to judge accurately and in the best interest of the player whether or not they've suffered a head injury. That's the first part of the protocol. But whenever we hear that, it makes us think that we're going through the entire, however long it takes, exercise protocol and and cognitive testing and all that sort of stuff. All of that is part of the protocol, but the first part of it is just the diagnosis. So if he was evaluated and they were a little bit concerned, they brought him in the next day, didn't have any symptoms, and there weren't that much concern the previous day, then I think it's reasonable to assume that he didn't have a concussion. And I don't have any reason. There have been some teams where it's been a little bit questionable. Did they not watch the video correctly? It certainly seemed like there was something going on. I've never had that particular concern with the Steelers themselves, so I'm going to say that I feel pretty confident that Roethlisberger is probably not much to worry about there with a head injury for him.
I'd really love to see a Blades of Glory remake with Joe Flacco and Ben Roethlisberger. We could do the two-headed quarterback kind of thing going on there with those two. But
two people I would not want to have dinner with in my kitchen. How about that?
See, there you go. Someone I wouldn't mind having dinner with, or at least buying a beer and thanking him, is Spencer Ware. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about his progress and how he's doing, because he's been cleared for contact.
They're not hearing anything about him, right? Which is really good. Which means that that the type of injury that he had is a very difficult injury to recover from, and the fact that everything from the offseason sounded positive, from not really hearing much about it at all in March and April, to Andy Reid being confident about him in May and June, to him being nowhere near the PUP list, participating in minicamp and beyond, and everything I've heard. I'm sure you're monitoring him as closely as I am, because I know how much you like Spencer Ware, has been positive, to the point where we're not hearing much about, Kareem Hunt got over whatever hamstring issues he was having, and now Spencer Ware is there as well. I don't have any reason to suspect there's going to be any issues there, and hopefully he is back to his usual self as a very capable backup and helping the Chiefs not need to feel like they're giving Kareem Hunt 90% of the touches as they had to do last year.
Gene, for my last question, football guys, the Audible Live, Thursday night, week 2, the preseason. Could have the doc back. I'm going to ask you to switch back into fantasy player mode for a second. And knowing everything not just as a fantasy player, but also as somebody who's become one of the strongest, best voices in this area. If I say to you, Jordan Reed, 7th round, Tyler Eifert, 13th round. Are these propositions that you're even going to consider when you're drafting?
I'm okay with Jordan Reed this year. I wish, for his sake, that he had maybe tried not to play through that toe injury with orthotics last year. I don't think that had a lot to do with hamstring injury necessarily, but we knew he was already kind of overcompensating with hip things and otherwise. If we were on target with what the speculation was last summer and he had the area of his toe fixed that we expected was kind of the problem, and he is recovered as well as he is, I'm glad that that Washington is settled in bringing him back a little bit slowly. But he's made it through all of the offseason and the beginning of camp here without suffering any soft tissue injuries. I don't think you can elevate him up there into that, the Gronkowski and Kelsey area where you might have thought a fully healthy, stable and durable Jordan Reed over the past couple of years, where you're thinking he's going to get 130 targets, 80, 90 catches and potentially double-digit touchdowns, where he's up in that, not first round category like Gronkowski would be, but certainly in that third or fifth round like Kelsey may be. I think seventh round sounds reasonable for Reed, depending on what else is there. And I haven't done a lot of redrafts yet to know whether or not, we're looking at some pretty viable running back or wide receiver candidates there. I don't think I'd be taking Reed over somebody with similar upside at one of those positions, especially if you like some tight ends a little bit later than that. But yeah, I was pretty reassured about Tyler Eifert, and I was glad he was a little bit saucy when he was replying to people, kind of like me, who said, you're on the PUP list again already. We've arguably recovered slowly from one back injury and the ankle issues that you had in the past. You don't like the sound of that at all. He sounds angry, motivated, chip on the shoulder going into a contract year. So assuming he is healthy and the core strength is there, and it really should be because it's been another 9 months or so since this most recent injury, if they follow through with their plans to maybe not overuse him on early downs and put him in those high leverage situations where he's always thrived and made him the fantasy option that he's been, then I think 13 round may be a steal if they put him out there and he's able to get 50 to 60 catches. And, maybe the yardage isn't there because he's not used on early downs a lot, but his fantasy value has always been tied a lot to his red zone usage, and that's not going to change. So if he's healthy enough now and can get through and play 14 to 16 games, I don't think there's much reason he can't get 60 catches and 8 touchdowns. And you get that in the 13th round in a tight end, and you don't have to worry about Jordan Reed in the 7th.
Oh, sorry. I was looking in my drawer for Tyler Eifert so that I could take him out and put him in my rankings in a relevant fashion now. But let's take it.
You don't feel warm and fuzzy about either one of those guys, right? I mean, again,
no,
I use the term injury prone, but there's nothing about these guys over the last 2 or 3 years that would suggest that they're durable enough to hold up over a 4-month demanding football season either. So there's definitely a prove it there. That's why they're available in those rounds that they are.
Yeah, I mean, I feel better about Jordan Reed, but I guess that's because I can get Vernon Davis in the 20th round. But then again, I can get Tyler Eifert too. But anyway, the last question I guess I have is about Saquon Barkley, and the reason being is with the left hamstring strain, and he's week to week, and he's like, end of the top 5 in the top 7 overall. A lot of people are, rookie back with a line that, as far as we know, the coaches are still yelling at them probably after practice. Is this it? Would you pick him at this stage? And does it have anything to do with the injury?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the injury because I think of the ones that we've seen. There was practice video of that where you kind of saw him reach out and stretch out a little bit to get that wheel route. It was on video. He slowed up right away. You could tell it was bothering him. It did not look like a 1-week injury. I'm not saying it's a high grade situation necessarily, but of the ones we've talked about, that would have been the one that I would have suspected to be a 2 to 4 week thing to begin with. And again, if they give him adequate time to heal, he gets through that, that honeymoon period and doesn't have an aggravation. Maybe we're in week 2 and week 3 and he's ready for 20 to 25 touches. It's not an issue. And then we come back to, well, we all knew what the quarterback skill position, which is pretty good, and offensive line situation is. And if you thought he was a top 5 pick then maybe we don't have to worry about it. But this, I think there's reason to be hopeful that he is full strength for practice leading into week 1. But I didn't see Jerick McKinnon's injury, and we didn't really see too much of Marlon Mack's injury, although we were told that one was going to be kind of an end of the preseason. For what you could see with Barkley, it's not one of those Andre Johnson or AJ Green things where you see him immediately reach up way high or way low, and it's going to be close to a tendon type thing. But it was one of those where the mechanism of that strain just had the look of a 2 to 4 week thing to begin with, and aggravations of those things are possible. So if you're deciding is Barkley, running back 3 or running back 5, I think you definitely move him to the bottom of the tier. I'm not necessarily saying you go after the, if you want a running back in that spot, that you go after the highest wide receivers at that spot just yet, because I still think I would probably put him above kind of the second tier running backs, but I don't think I would be debating him alongside David Johnson and the other guys up on top. Yeah, I think Elliott and Bell and Gurley and Johnson are ahead of Barkley half a tier at this point for sure, and probably always were for me, honestly. But I wouldn't downgrade him too much unless you're, if we're having this conversation in 2 weeks and we've not seen anything about Barkley at all, then there's reason to be concerned. But hopefully we'll see him back in week 1 as well.
We will see Dr. Gene most every week, and I already feel better. Gene, your bedside manner is. There's been so many times that people don't get to see this stuff behind the scenes in our communications, but immediately, and I feel bad for you sometimes, Gene, that immediately, anytime anything happens, we're always hitting that Dr. Gene to the white phone, Dr. Gene to the white phone, and we're all lucky to have you back. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hopefully nothing else happens tonight. Everybody healthy, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer on Nick Foles, but I didn't really like the way that looked. I always have a little bit of difficulty judging shoulder injuries on video. It's just a little bit difficult to tell. I feel like, at least in my personal experience, it's always more helpful to actually ask what's going on. And I've seen shoulder dislocations and other things like that. Sometimes even if you get a number of angles like what we saw in the Foles injury, it's hard to tell. But just the way his shoulder was stressed and the way he grabbed about it afterwards, I don't really like this word strain. I don't know. I know he came back out of the locker room, but that's my long way of saying hopefully we hear good news about Foles tomorrow. And if not, we'll talk about it next week, because I'm sure there'll be a whole lot more to talk about on Wentz.
Hey, we got through a segment without talking about Andrew Luck for the first time in I don't even know how long.
So I wrote the injury rounds article as the first one of the year this week, and I just couldn't help. 2 weeks ago, we were thinking, oh my God, what's going to go on with Andrew Luck? And then all of a sudden, nothing. He's fine. No worries.
Did he stop by?
How big a deal was the last 17 months? Nothing. It's all good.
It's all just a bad dream.
I think he stopped by Marie Laveau's house in New Orleans on the way from one of his, Civil War campaigns, and got himself a voodoo doll. And I think they're all running back voodoo dolls.
I don't think they're allowed to do the Civil War stuff anymore now that he shaved his facial hair into that mustache. I think you're going to have to come up with something else.
He's caught up to the 1970s.
He kind of does look like, but he looks like the Gone with the Wind lead now. He kind of looks like a little bit like.
I think he needs a little, that mustache is going to have to grow out and grow out past his ears for that to be Gone with the Wind style, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
A little bit too, as if I know a whole lot about facial hair. All right, boys. Enjoy until next week. I think you better get rid of me because I'm babbling away.
This is wonderful. Facial hair, historical reconstructions. And now we get to frolic, Matt. And by the way, folks, Football Guys giveaway. I'm not going to spout off a bunch of numbers and dots and things. Just search on Twitter for Football Guys giveaway. We're giving away a lifetime subscription. This is what you get if you win. Lifetime subscription to Football Guys, season long. 45-minute video conference call with Football Guys staff to talk draft strategy, a championship belt, and a customized video from Matthew Berry, the one, the only Matthew Berry from ESPN and Roto Pass, talking smack to your league. And whoever refers the most people to the giveaway, which after you enter, you see how you can get referrals, will also get a lifetime season-long pro subscription. Those of you on the email list got that. 11 days left to pile up those referrals. Check out the footballguys.com giveaway. Also, checking out, you've already given us some great gifts this preseason, Matt. You're being the anti-Sigmund Bloom with your top 50 players. Although I remember you wouldn't go near Antonio Brown.
You gotta have something.
You're going to do something. I did the master plan today. Those of you that are familiar with it, it's kind of like a modular draft plan. I narrow it to my targets, but I like for people to think of it as something they can.
It's the only master plan that was ever good.
Yeah, well, it's a very it should allow you to feel like you have options, and
Yes.
you can change lanes in your draft as your draft comes into focus. Now you're going to do something that I was really excited to hear about. That you're going to give people draft plans, but they're going to be draft plans based on your risk tolerance, basically. So before we get into any nuts and bolts of draft strategy, which we'll talk about for the last 25 minutes, and I noticed that our viewership has stayed level, so hopefully that means YouTube is cooperating with us. I'm not hearing that it hasn't been. That was yeah. But I want to ask you first, Matt. This year, which of the 3 envelopes of yours are you going to open?
Man, it's a good question, because after I finished it this afternoon, I really like all 3 that I've done, because they're really about, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure book. But I just geared it towards what I think is conservative, moderate, and high risk. And I already had somebody, I think it's probably because they just looked at the picture and saw Alex Collins and go, that's not a conservative pick. But if you go past the picture and actually read the words, you'll discover that how I define conservative. And I think that, what's interesting about that is you go through this exercise, is that a conservative draft strategy isn't always about the positions you pick, but the players you take and what you think about what, do they have a high, are they usually healthy? Are they highly productive? Do they have good surrounding talent? Are they going to get used at a high volume? And sometimes some of those players, when you look at the combinations of what you have on the board, suddenly you're looking at it and going, wow, this conservative view is, again, one polar opposite of the high risk view, and really the middle ground, the one that the herd mentality is going to be, is more the moderate. But I'd say at this stage, I'm probably going to go high risk, because I like high risk. And Josh Gordon, I still have this belief that this is all just a ruse to stay off of Hard Knocks. Not a ruse, but kind of a setup here. And he'll be back week 1 and catching bombs from Tyrod Taylor. And I'm willing to take a risk with somebody like that.
Yeah, that plot thickened with some details about a child support court battle, and I don't know what to make of it. I have no idea. I can make the argument for Josh Gordon looking like a smart pick in hindsight and looking like a wasted pick in hindsight, but that's
right.
That's the fun of it. Okay, so I'd like the way that you outline that. So to illustrate this a little more, because I'm continuing to get on my pedestal, my soapbox about Rob Gronkowski, and saying that he's a first round value. You don't have to take him in the first round. You take him in the second round. But is he more of a high risk player because of his injury history? Although 3 out of the last 4 years he's played at least 14 games, or is he a low risk player because he's basically the most efficient? I mean, maybe Antonio Brown is as efficient as he's been, but the most efficient on a per game basis of this era in fantasy football. And he's got Tom Brady as his quarterback, and so on and so forth.
Well, obviously he's a great player, and there are a lot of reasons why that you can, argue why he's worth that range. And I have him up there with Travis Kelce. I like Travis Kelce a little more because of his health history. And I also think that he finally got a quarterback who's willing to throw the ball in the way that Travis Kelce should be able to make the most of it. So if he's already was a number 1 tight end, I think that he has room to even grow, and he's just entering his prime. But that said, I have Gronkowski is a moderate risk. So he's in that middle of the road. If you're going to go, a moderate risk or high risk strategy, he's worth it as a second round or third round pick in a PPR league without question. Especially if you're thinking about the range of draft strategies that you want to have, because I look at it this way, is that you want to think about it ahead of time and go, do you want to avoid positional runs? Because if you do, then you want to draft a tight end early. You probably want to draft a quarterback before the main positional run. You may even want to draft a defense before defenses start to go off the board and kickers go off the board, knowing that you're just like, if you are one of those people that you're like, I don't want to play rent a defense. As good as your article is and as good as that information is, for me, I'm one of those people most of the time. In some leagues, I'm good with it, but I'm like, you know what? There's like 5 players I'm trying to prioritize, and I don't want to forget about this stupid defense that I have to deal with, this week, because the one that I have isn't good, and then it kind of messes up the whole works. I'd rather just say, you know what? I think the Rams are going to be really good this year. I'm going to get them early, and there's enough value at these other positions. So when you look at a guy like, you look at it from that standpoint, the tight end position, taking them early on that level, I think it is about you defining, again, do you want some, set it and forget it position so that then you can take a whole bunch of darts and throw them towards running back and wide receiver? And I'm kind of more in that range because I feel like I have a good beat on who's talented and who's not and who are in good situations. It doesn't mean it always works out, but the more of those guys I can get who are my guys, the more likely one of them's really going to bust out.
I agree with you. I think that point cannot be emphasized enough. And I know that there's a lot of computation that goes into this idea that there's only one tight end. You can stream tight ends. But I feel much more confident. I feel much more confident on two levels in late round players working out at wide receiver and running back. One is just the depth at wide receiver, and that pass offenses are becoming better at emphasizing matchups and becoming more varied, so that week to week you can get more players above the fantasy relevance line. And in the case of running back, injuries, depth charts changing. So it's not just my ability to identify them, but I think you should always draft confident. Like, that's why I think Mark Ingram and Julian Edelman are good picks at ADP, because you've taken them, so you can take picks later on. Like, I don't know, Peyton Barber or someone like that to help paper over the weeks you're going to miss them. And you trust yourself to make up those gaps. And I think it's much easier to make up those gaps at wide receiver and running back, both identifying them and just the pool being larger than tight end. That being said, every moment, every day that passes, I have this feeling Dallas Goedert is going to be the best fantasy rookie tight end since Mike Ditka. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to think. I just think it's going to happen. Okay, I'll give you something from the master plan, and you can think of this in your 3 lanes, risks, or just take it on as a proposition. I almost feel like 2018 is back to the future, back to when most of us got our start playing fantasy football. I am almost ready to say, Matt, that you have to take a running back in the first round. You have to. The only player I can say for sure in the first round, a non-running back that is worth taking ahead of these running backs, is Antonio Brown. The problem with Antonio Brown is you have to take him in the top 5, which means by the time you get back around to your pick in the second round in a 12-team league, you're looking at Jordan Howard, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey probably as your best running backs to be your running back 1. And I'd like taking Rob Gronkowski there if he's still there. And perhaps, if you like McCaffrey, if you like Howard, if you like Mixon, it's not so scary. But I feel like after that tier of Cook and Fournette and Gordon and Barkley and Hunt, there's an argument for Devontae Freeman bouncing back in Sarkisian year 2, but I don't think he's going to be there. If you have a pick high enough to take Antonio Brown, I don't know if Devontae Freeman's going to be there. So what do you think of the idea of going back to the genesis of the stud running back theory in 2018?
I mean, I certainly think that it can work, and it has its value. I look at it as it comes down to this. I think that we used to look at stud running back theory, and I think that we think about the back in general, how great the running back was. But I think in our naivety to look back at those years and fondly in some regards, we forget about how great those offensive lines were too. And the more I do this, the more I'm coming around to the idea of, like, if the back's pretty good, if he's good enough, but that offensive line is good, I'm going for that back and that offensive line. And so is that back, a steady volume producer, and the line's so, but they're good enough, and he's shown that he can be good enough in that situation. So, I mean, I have some drafts where I'm going, yeah, Todd Gurley. I'm taking Todd Gurley in the first round where I can, and I can go from that route. But I still find myself kind of drawn to wide receivers early because I've identified backs that I really believe in this year. So, and I feel like I can get them in the 3rd, 4th, and somewhere before the 8th round. And so it's like, it's not necessarily an upside down draft or zero RB or however you want to call it. But it's kind of just an adjustment to what's going on now. So I find myself really believing in Alex Collins.
Yeah.
I just look at that line and I'm like, that is the safest pick of any running back in the first 5 rounds that isn't an elite back.
Yes.
Jordan Howard, I'm looking at that and going, yeah, Tariq Cohen might be able to do some really great stuff, but they're going to pound the ball. And Jordan Howard last year played with a shoulder injury where they had to help the dude up, and he was still carrying the ball like he was an old school back. And I'm sitting there thinking, those 2 guys I can get in round 3 and 4, and I'm getting them in rounds 3 and 4 on a regular basis. And then, if I'm taking a risk with anybody, it might be Jay Ajayi. I'm kind of, because again, the Eagles have a good line. And then, the part where I think everyone will probably look at all 3 of my draft plans and go, you're a loon, is because I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs when it comes to Marshawn Lynch. I mean, that's just basically it. I just believe. I watched them all year, and I heard people talking about it. I'm going, do you watch football? Have you even watched the game? Because I'm watching this and I don't get it. And then I know that everyone's down on the Oakland Raiders, and I think part of it is that there's some butthurt media people who do some analytics work, and he sat there and trolled them, which I thought was kind of funny. And then you have the fact that he got Martavis Bryant, and then some of the pixie looks are kind of awkward, but people so forget how balanced his offenses are when he has talent. Maybe in 3 years, when he gets to stock this room full of talent and it doesn't work well, then we can say, see, that's what he did in Tampa, and that's why it didn't work out. But when he inherits teams with talent, he knows what to do with it. And I'm telling you, this is going to be one of the best run games in football this year. It is going to be Back to the Future, and you can get it somewhere between round 6 and 8. And so to me, when I look at it from that perspective, I'm like, there's an embarrassment of riches in the mid rounds of running backs who are decent enough that I'm still good going in that route.
Yeah, and I would be fine with Collins as my 1 and Lynch as my 2. I call Collins a stealth running back 1. And what I really love is having him as my running back 2, but he's fine. And he is a conservative pick because if for some reason you think Alex Collins doesn't belong in the 3rd round, and you can really, as of right now, maybe with our talk and other people adding to the momentum, you won't be able to get Alex Collins in the 3rd round. Maybe he'll become a late 2nd round pick. But I really think that unless you're picking at the very end of the 3rd round, you can count on him. And I think you can count on Lynch in the 6th round. If you don't think Alex Collins belongs in the 3rd round, or you think that he is a risky pick, then I hope you have Javorius Allen on every single one of your teams, because the backfield's going to produce. There's no doubt about it. And I hate to say this because, Matt, we talk so much on the air. We read each other's work. We've worked together for so long and we often overlap in our takes. And Kenneth Dixon, I find it hard to move on. I thought everything was paid for him to really burst back on the scene this year. But now I find myself saying it maybe next year, maybe some point down the line, but I feel like it's not going to happen for him this year.
Yeah, he's the longer it takes for him. I mean, he showed enough promise. It was there. You could see the little flashes of what he's capable of, but he's pretty much lost this team in terms of they don't feel like they can count on him probably to stay healthy. And this was his shot to really at least say, you know what? He's still that good. We like him. We'll use a committee. And then when it's time to re-up with Collins, we can look and go, well, what we have with Dixon, maybe we can get a better deal with Dixon and kind of play one off the other and decide who's going to be the lead back. But Dixon's going to have to go somewhere else for sure.
Yeah. So it's Collins and Allen, and take them both. They can both be relevant in any given week. And Javorius Allen, Buck Allen, is not a guy who's going to add a lot of value to touches, but he's catnip for coaches. He's so dependable. So that Ravens backfield is one that's being overlooked for fantasy value. And the Marshawn Lynch carry from last week, if you had any worries or doubts about what Marshawn Lynch has, he's looking back as he's running past someone. I mean, I know it's just the preseason, but if you watch that and you have any doubt about him.
Yeah, I mean, the speed's there. And he lost weight. I mean, he was overweight, which might be why maybe Del Rio was like cautious about using him. But you just have to realize, look at the heavy set they ran out of and just created all these problems of run fits for Detroit, who's always been undisciplined with their run fits for years whenever you watch them. And so there's that, but it's that just flat out speed he has. And the fact that they're like, okay, I got Doug Martin too, and I've got Chris Warren, who you should be watching. Maybe
he's going to make the team.
Round. Yeah. And you're thinking, last year it was him and a bunch of scat backs. So they're planning. This is their attack. They're bringing the big old wrecking ball this year as their offense.
Yeah, and you'll be pleased to know that none other than Warren Sharp, who was on the couch this week, said that he also thinks that the Oakland offense shouldn't be taken lightly because of John Gruden's success as an offensive mind in the past and what he has to work with there. And did you see who got credit for giving Chris Warren the pep talk before his big performance in week 1 of the preseason?
Was it Lynch?
Mama Lynch.
Really?
Mama Lynch gave him the pep talk.
Did you hear what Lynch said to him to begin?
Oh, like, you didn't get drafted, you must have messed up.
I didn't do anything. Yeah, you messed up.
Something. Yeah.
And you know what that is, because he took one look at this guy in camp and goes, "There's no way this guy shouldn't have been drafted."
Right.
Yeah.
He must have done something if they didn't draft you, but he's doing something now on the field. It's really fun. I think that
his dad's retweeting me. It's funny.
It's great. It's a small world, and social media makes it even smaller. And I feel like right now you and I could probably spend the next 2 or 3 hours just talking about undrafted free agents in the preseason and camp. Start talking about guys like the Wrecking Null that we talked about last week, and Sean Wilson and Philip Lindsay and so on. But let's circle back. Well, we got about a little under 10 minutes left, talking a little bit more about strategy. And one of the things you said that I'll come back to is that you were excited about all 3 strategies after you wrote them. So let's start with the low risk strategy. What was one of the things that made you excited about taking that route?
Well, I think what I found is that the low risk strategy is really about eliminating as many players as possible from your decision making matrix, because it's the more decisions you have to make, the higher the risk that you end up having to go on a certain level. And it's based on your idea that if you're going to go conservative, you're basically eliminating players that you think have too much volatility. And what I found exciting is that, after about this is how it works that way, for the first 8 to 10 rounds. And then after about the 11th or 12th round, all the strategies are about the same, because you still want to go high upside at the end of your draft. You don't want to be taking somebody that you say, at best he's only going to get me 400 yards, but he might have 2 really good games. I mean, that's just silly. So, but I mean, looking at it, I found that I could still have some variety where I could go running back early, I could go wide receiver early, I could play a little bit. I had flexibility within that. And I found that the same players, there's still the differences between these 3 strategies aren't that great, because you'll see some of the same players all the way across from one risk level to the next. It's just that there's maybe anywhere between 2 to 3 players who are very different based on what risk level there is. So I found that, if I can get guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Michael Thomas and Sammy Watkins as my wide receiver 3, and then still get some guy, and then see that there are guys sitting in the background like Keelan Cole and Cam Meredith and Chris Godwin, who are basically starters, or if I want some flexibility and I go, you know what, Robert Woods in the 8th round. I mean, Robert Woods could easily be the receiving leader for a very high-powered Rams offense. And so this year, more than any, feels like there are multiple ways to win in a way that it's like seems very clear. And so the fact that I could just kind of say, you know what, all this is, if I put on my hat and say all this is noise today, and I don't want to deal with any noise whatsoever, that's why I liked the conservative view, because it was just kind of like, all right, these are the guys I want. And I find that even sometimes some of those players in one tier drop to the next.
Yeah, I think that let everybody else deal with those thorny players and you just keep pocketing the value. And then you're right, there's so many paths this year. One of the things that is kind of fun is I actually think the proliferation of information, the information gap being leveled for everybody, is allowing draft strategy to start to become more diverse again. And you're drafting reflecting your own beliefs and your own style again, which is good, which is fun. Just with a couple minutes left, instead of going back, and we'll have more to talk about after the articles come out, I'm sure. But as you've been doing these preparations and taking that 30,000 foot view, is there a player or a situation that still, as of this moment, it is that situation, that player that you're saying, I want to let somebody else deal with it. It might end up being profitable. It might end up being a banana peel that we slip on, but I can't get a bead on it, so I don't want to deal with it.
Well, Carson Wentz is then the Eagles. Other than the tight end and maybe Jay Ajayi are one right off the bat that I just don't even want to consider. I think that's a tough one for me. Then looking at, I'm kind of not wanting to deal with any of the Cardinals. As much as I'm in a league where I lost David Johnson for the year, and it's a keeper league, and I got to keep him for one more year. So I have him, but I'd kind of just like to see how that offensive line plays out. So I'm not really loving that situation all that much. Marcus Mariota, I know there are people that just love Marcus Mariota, and there are a lot of people that even praise him. And look, Jalen Ramsey had nice things to say about him. I think he was just afraid of Taylor Lewan coming after him. But I mean, I know it's one thing to talk trash about your girlfriend's brother, Golden Tate, but that's wide receiver you shouldn't be afraid of. But I know he's afraid of Taylor Lewan. I mean, come on now. So I would say that I'm just not that. I'm still kind of in wait and see mode about the Titans offense. I just feel like that. I feel like that Titans fans are so excited. I mean, like they're so, they all seem very excitable about their team and what their prospects could be. And I still feel like that they're a little bit shrill with that excitement. And I'm not, it could happen, but I want to wait and see with that. So that's another one. Who's going to be the starting receiving core in Chicago? I mean, it's just kind of, and who's going to get the most looks?
Anthony Miller.
Yeah, I mean, I'm drafting him, but Allen Robinson, great individual talent, but when he's healthy, but it's been 2-3 years now since we've really felt like Allen Robinson, and now it's just like he's getting drafted like Allen Robinson, but am I really feeling Mitchell Trubisky enough to do that? Again, that's a situation where it's like, I get it. I can see where it can happen, but I'll let someone else handle that one.
It makes a lot of sense to me for the Bears to use Allen Robinson the way that the Rams used Sammy Watkins last year and say, we will take a stalemate. When we play Detroit, Darius Slay shuts him down. When we play Minnesota, Xavier Rhodes shuts him down, and Tariq Cohen runs free, or Adam Shaheen rips the seam, or whatever. We'll take our chances with all those other matchups. Yeah. You can cancel out Allen Robinson and get one on us. So yeah, I agree with that. We come to the end of the hour. We're really getting it rolling. Well, I want to ask you one quick parting shot, because the washing machine is going. Week 2, the preseason is going to give us a ton to talk about. Aubrey's given, tonight we're going to talk about Jake Kumro. We're going to talk about James Conner. We're going to talk about James White. And there's so many things that happen from tonight. And we still have a weekend of football ahead of us. Give me one thing from preseason week 1 that will stay with you, that stood out with you.
That will stay with us?
Yeah. Something that you were just like, oh, I've taken notice of that.
Well, it's kind of obvious. It's going to be kind of obvious, but I'll say it anyway, is that there's a certain quarterback up in the Mile High City who played every bit the way that he looked like when we watched him together.
They actually gave him a chance.
Yeah, and he should have thrown 3 interceptions in that game. One of them should have been returned for a touchdown, but he kept on slinging, and he actually had 2 passes dropped in the end zone at the end of the game, and he was more ticked off that he lost that game, even though he had no chance really of winning it. But he was such a cool customer, and he's a baller. You can just see it, and I know that John Elway's ego might be a little hurt that Paxton Lynch had to get demoted, and that Devonta Booker has a tenuous hold on a starting job, and that they might bring in a veteran behind all that. But Chad Kelly's going to win that guy over, and I think that it's going to be within the next year to 18 months.
Yeah, well, like you say, baller. Just Chad Kelly looks at home on a football field.
Yeah.
And it was great to see him out there, and it was great to get to steer the ship while Cecil, they're up there in Denver, monitoring the Broncos and John Elway's every move, is on assignment, and it's exciting times of football, guys, folks. So exciting as draft season, really the meat of it. I know some drafts have taken place already. Is here. Articles like the master plan, like Matt Waldman's 3 draft strategies, and so much more. I want to say the number was 51 new articles this week.
Yeah, it's like an avalanche, man.
At Football Guys. So if you aren't part of us Seasons Long Pro, take care of that. If you don't have the Draft Dominator, go to the App Store, take care of that. Yeah. Lineup Dominator, Waiver Wire Trade Dominator, and remember that giveaway, Football Guys giveaway. Just look on Twitter for Football Guys giveaway. And remember, whoever gets the most referrals also will win a lifetime subscription. And hopefully, 20 years or 30 years in that lifetime subscription, we're old, but we can still talk and still watch football, and we'll still be with you. And we'll be with you this week, next week, and throughout the season always, because we love you, because you are the very classiest.